Hey babes, my name is Nadia Sayapin, and welcome back to another round of Author is reading her own book because she can't afford to pay for an audiobook. We are currently reading The Rebels, and we are on chapter 45. We're nearly done, guys. Look at that. Nearly done. If there are any trigger warnings, they will be down below. Do please make sure you check those out first because the last chapter was pretty heavy and I don't think this one's going to be a little bit better, but not much. So, protect your mental health. Make sure you're ready for this. And without further ado, The Rebels, chapter 45. I found a deer track heading in the direction I needed and followed it. I had just over 2 miles to go, maybe an hour if I could keep to the trails. As I ran, I stuffed every piece of emotion I could find into a little box in my chest. I had no time for them. I swallowed a sob, then stuffed that in the box too. We'd looked while the army was setting up, but hadn't seen any unusual movement in the trees between us and them. Trusting to our earlier findings, I didn't slack. Less than a mile. Plenty of distance. That's all I needed. I leaped a fallen branch and felt a twinge in my knee. No time. I breathed deeply and concentrated on it, feeling my lungs working. Running was such an easy effort these days. We ran everywhere. To a fight, away from it, to evade the enemy, hunting. I changed course mid-stride to avoid a clump of shrubs, leaped from rock to rock over a narrow creek, climbed up out of the gully, and paused just before the top to peer over the edge. Almost there. Almost to the grove of trees I'd sighted earlier. I swung north a little more. Didn't want to come towards Steve directly. Slower now, creeping through blackberries on a narrow game track, last year's canes and brittle and prone to snagging on every little thing, including skin. Bushes replaced the blackberries, letting me know I'd found it. The grove of trees. I sighed, craning my head back, walking carefully through the grove to spot a good tree. I stood at the base of one, a huge fir. The tree stood about 3 rows back from the edge, giving me cover while allowing me to see. Slowly, slowly, so as not to rustle a branch or a needle, waiting for every gust of wind, I inched my way up the tree, pausing with the breeze and taking care not to hook the rifle on any branches. I stopped nearly 2/3 of the way up, straddling a branch barely strong enough to support me. I had both feet braced on lower branches and peered out around the trunk. I looked just over the oval. Light green leaves on top of a walnut tree. The edge of the trees was packed with plants taking every advantage of the excess sunlight, predominantly blackberries. Positioning my feet and knees so I'd be secure, I carefully unslung Phoenix's rifle. The sap on my hands made the rifle sticky, and I unconsciously wiped them on my pants, trying to dislodge the sap, but picking up more dirt instead. Sighting down the rifle, I could see the girls clearly if the leaves of the walnut tree moved just right. Moving in millimeters, I found the giant that Doc had pointed out as her husband. Anna and Kwanjay remained out of sight. Just as well. This was a mission of mercy. Thunder and lightning came first. This close, I realized Doc had been generous in her assessment of their condition. My heart thumped heavily and saliva gathered at the back of my throat. I swallowed the bile back as my stomach tried to rebel at the sight of the burns, lacerations, and blood, trying desperately not to count the number of visible bones. At least the cool day and good breeze spared them the irritation of flies, allowing me to see them clearly. Thunder had tears running unchecked down her face, head thrown back to the sun, mouth moving soundlessly. Lightning, I swallowed convulsively. Her eyes were missing. The blood ran freely down her face, mixing with that on her body. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, agony written deeply in the lines of her face. I squeezed my eyes shut, resting my cheek on the warm wooden rifle stock, breathing deeply. I rubbed my cheek on my shoulders, telling myself those weren't tears. I was just sweaty. Liar. I inhaled and held it, opening my eyes and sighting down the scope once more, ignoring Steve, Anna, Quanjay, Sutton. I focused the scope on lightning. "Hail," I whispered, and exhaled slowly. After the first crack of the rifle, Steve began swarming like ants, spreading out over the ground, trying to discover where the shot came from. Before the sound of the first shot faded, I'd moved the rifle a fraction and fired again. I caught a glimpse of Thunder sagging against her bonds before I lowered the rifle and pressed my face against the rough bark, crying silently. I hugged the tree, the rifle awkwardly squished between me and it, listening to the shouts, whistles, and hastily fired shots from the army, a stone's throw away. I stayed in my tree until darkness crept over the land, hiding against the rough bark and coming to grips with my new reality. The reality of being a person who could commit a mercy killing. I heard the soldiers come into contact with the thorny brambles near my tree. Rifle shots to the east, a few scattered explosions, and screaming. Lots of screaming. I fell into a light doze, and after a while, I couldn't tell what was reality or what was nightmare. One voice pulled me out of my haze, a lone scream of agony, the sound rising and falling before a thick, bubbling note entered. How long could a person scream? Thunder and Lightning knew. Eventually, he fell silent, just like them. When I estimated it had been dark for 3 hours and I hadn't heard any other movement for a while, I began warming up my muscles, flexing one group at a time. While I tried to keep them warm, the tree was pretty damn uncomfortable, and moving now brought shooting pains to everything. I nearly fell out of the tree when I unhooked my leg from its branch. I stuffed the collar of my jacket into my mouth, biting down as joints and muscles shrieked in protest at what they'd been put through. Gravity aided my descent from the tree more than any ability of mine, and my legs folded neatly as my feet touched the ground. Lying prone, I stretched everything, shifting uncomfortably on the rifle under my back. Well, at least I could move now without needing to worry about a 40-foot drop. Retracing my steps out of the grove took barely a minute, and I took the first path south, pausing often to listen for Steve. Yes, the concentration of soldiers was greatest to the south, but I hadn't brought much in the way of supplies, and they'd pissed me off. I had no idea how wide a net of traps the fighters had set. But by the number of screams, I thought it likely that Steve had found many of them, though hopefully not all. Even before the thought passed through my mind, another scream started, almost directly east of me. I paused, listening, pursing my lips as I gauged the distance. Maybe 1.5 miles. I kept looking for Orion, my favorite constellation, before I remembered that he wouldn't be visible again until fall. My mouth pulled down and tears welled. Crying at the drop of a hat would be a standard thing for a while, I knew. But I really wanted to see the hunter. I felt less alone when he strode across the night sky. The breeze we had all day had ushered clouds in, obscuring any moonlight and forcing me to slow almost to a crawl. Creeping through some shrubs, I heard a cough and froze. I listened, straining my ears to place the person who'd coughed. Rustling to my left, along with the man quietly clearing his throat, showed me where the bastard hid. I finally found him as a darker shadow against the moving leaves. I dropped to my belly, smearing all exposed skin with dirt. Steve paced a slow circle, once passing right in front of me before returning to the more sheltered location. I looked slowly around the space in front of me. Was he guarding someone? A bit more time and careful listening showed a small patrol scattered in the clearing in front of me. I bared my teeth, snarling, because these men slept peacefully while women worth 100 of them lay dead. The snarl turned into a grin. I needed supplies anyway. The thing about being on your own is all the extra time to think. Evading patrols, rifling houses, and hot-wiring cars had long since become second nature to us. Sure, you pay more attention at the moment of being exposed, but most of the time a tiny space was left for random thoughts. Like, why couldn't Steve figure out? They all sounded like a herd of schoolchildren. They really couldn't grasp the concept of walking silently. I ran through a neglected orchard as I pondered this thought. Weren't army guys supposed to be silent and deadly? My best guess, as I clambered carefully over a barbed wire fence, was that they were quiet. We'd just learned to be quieter, courtesy of our current status as prey. I slept part of the night in a maple tree, lying along a thick branch tied loosely to the trunk. I watched the sky darken, enjoying the contrast of new green leaves against the dark blue sky. I woke with a start listening and heard a clattering close by. I untied myself and hitched around until I could peer around the trunk. There, barely 20 feet away, a group of 3 soldiers set up camp. I snorted softly. Making a big fire. What a bunch of idiots. Too bad they'd never learn. The next day had scattered shots sounding through the mountains to my left, and I decided that this was the perfect time to turn east. 2 nights and 1 day of heading south should have put me in the general vicinity of the ridge we'd long since equipped to take on an invasion. The idea was to keep all fighting as far from the lair as possible. All the fighters would have been slowly retreating in front of any soldiers, making their way to this ridge, leaving a trail just clear enough to be visible, but concealed enough for Steve to think he had us. A single road led to the wilderness point, which was crisscrossed with trails barely wide enough to walk single file. Before the road reached the parking lot giving access to these trails, however, a tall ridge rose next to the gravel road. Its slopes were lightly forested with ancient trees that were unable to grow too large, and the crown of the ridge sported a nest of boulders. Now I just had to find the damn thing. I lay in a field in the early morning, exhausted, landmarks obscured by a light mist. I could still hear the shots. I'd barely slept and had been walking since just before first light, continually hitting dead ends and having to retrace my steps and start fresh. The final straw happened when I walked over a patch of grass barely covering slick mud. My feet ended in a puddle, my back and ass in the mud, and I hit my head on a small rock nearly covered by grass. Moving again was too much effort. I lay there staring at the sky and wondering why I should get up. The girls would be fine without me. Seahorse and Phoenix could lead. Tears welled up and I saw Thunder slumping against her bonds again, face finally relaxing in death. Lightning's agonized, silent screams slacking only when my bullet tore through her heart. "What's the point?" I whispered brokenly to the clouds. "They're better off without a murderer anyway." Tears trickled down the sides of my face, and I couldn't find the enemy to wipe them away. I wanted to sleep. Maybe forever. I didn't want this stupid war. I didn't want the time to contemplate who I was becoming fighting it. The tears came faster, and I writhed in an agony that didn't have a physical source. My fingers clawed at the ground and my jaw hurt, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't pull them apart to let out the scream building in my throat. I don't know how long I lay there, grunting and struggling against myself, when suddenly warm air rushed over my face, and a soft, velvety something pressed against my forehead. It didn't move, it just held the spot. Warmth pressed just above my eyes, and slowly I relaxed, slumping to the ground. I opened my eyes to see a horse looming over me, a lovely black and white. I twisted my head around to check. Gelding, whose feet were barely more than a foot from my head. Noticing movement, he lipped my hair gently, nosing me until I rolled onto my hands and knees. From my new position, I saw he'd approached me with a purpose. He had orange baling twine tangled around one rear leg and one front leg. Recently enough that he was still healthy, with no apparent signs of swelling, but enough to limit his movements. I pulled up a handful of grass to wipe the worst of the snot from my face, then finished the job with my cuff. "Hey, buddy," I croaked, voice raw from crying. "Need a hand?" I stood slowly, using the horse to get to my feet, and he waited patiently, sniffing me interestedly. I pulled out a small pocket knife, flipping it open, keeping my free hand on his side to reassure him and let him know exactly where I stood. It took only a moment to cut the twine, and a bit more time to unwind it. I blew out a breath of relief when I saw he definitely didn't have any infection, though the hair was rubbed thin in a few places. "Looks like I came along just in time, didn't I?" Gave a watery chuckle, rubbing his nose. He nudged me hard, and I paused. I came along just in time for him. Who's to say? Maybe the fighters could use a hand too. He pushed me again. "All right, I get it," I sighed, rubbing his ears. "Want to come?" The horse shook his head, but followed when I took a few steps. I went back to fetch the lengths of twine and held them up, assessing them. I shrugged. Couldn't hurt to try. It took several minutes, but I finally had a working hackamore with enough left to give me a single rein. "Oh, I hope you know neck reining, boy," I muttered, finding a low rock to give me a slight boost. It's been years since I've ridden, and I wasn't particularly good to begin with, but I couldn't pass up a fresh set of legs. It took a few tries before I found my balance, and what do you know? That horse found a small track that soon led us to the very road I'd been trying to find for hours. Phew, beauty! I leaned forward to hug the horse and lurched, sliding abruptly down his side. I only prevented myself from falling off by grabbing his neck and mane before edging cautiously upright. This time, I settled for patting him carefully, then nudging him up the road. I couldn't be sure how far I had to go before we reached the ridge, and after a few minutes we tried trotting. And trotting with a broken bra feels almost as good as running. Still, we kept a steady pace, and I heard gunshots more frequently. Not enough for me to think they'd joined in outright combat. More like the fighters were still drawing groups of Steve in. A sudden wetness between my legs had me sitting rigidly on the horse's back, and he halted. I popped a squat against a rock and discovered red slime in my trousers. Shark Week had struck again. I sighed, reaching for the pocket where I kept an emergency tampon. All of the female fighters carried one or two, and this looked like my last. Motherfucking period, I muttered. Damn thing had been getting even harder to predict, and by my best guess, it'd been nearly 2 months since my last one. Doc reckoned hard exercise and a lack of fats were to blame, and who was I to argue with a medical professional? Yuck, I grimaced as I inserted the damn thing and hoped I wouldn't get sepsis from my poorly cleaned hands. I just bent over to get my pants up when a rapid exchange of gunfire sounded to the east, the direction I needed to go. I craned my head around so fast my neck cracked. Fuck! Put one hand to my neck, testing the movement, while the other kept my pants from falling. I rolled my head around, and to my surprise, all the pain I'd been experiencing over the last few weeks in my neck and shoulders had vanished. Hot damn! I pulled my pants up the rest of the way and hustled to the horse, only to have to stop and concentrate on unsticking my zipper and doing the belt up properly. We tried a canter this time, and the horse had less trouble than I did. Between sensitive boobs, a sore groin, and early onset cramps, I was pissed off. Son of a bitching assholes invading our fucking miserable country can't keep to themselves. No, they have to come here and bother us. The horse's ears flicked back periodically, listening to my litany, but he obediently kept up the pace. When I pulled the horse up, the shot sounded so close that my ears hurt. I stashed him down a side track that led to a small pool in the passing creek. He'd be safe there. Joining the fight, I didn't even come close to the first soldier. I saw a helmet, I shot it, moving slowly from one point to another, shooting anything not me, pausing with increasing frequency as the cramps steadily worsened. I bent over, leaning against a tree, breathing slowly until the cramps eased. From that position, I saw another soldier, this one climbing the ridge. I knelt, unslung the rifle, and shot him, moving on without watching him fall. I curled up again, breathing slowly to stop the pain tremors that sometimes happened on bad cramps. I saw another soldier and shot him too, not caring if he were dead or wounded. Now, you know what? Wounded worked just fine. I hurt, and I wanted them to hurt too. I still hadn't seen any of my people, and I hoped all of them were safely inside the nest of boulders. I only saw an occasional flash of movement up there as they fired shots, harrying the enemy, but plenty of soldiers on the slopes. A sudden rock slide took out a thickly clustered group who'd found the path, and I laughed, seeing the fighters ducking out of sight at the top. There they were, fucking shit up and making me proud. I made my way to a new spot, pressing gently on my belly until I needed a fresh cartridge. This new position granted me an even better view of the men on the ridge, and best of all, I could keep kneeling. Assholes picked the wrong fucking week to mess with us, I muttered, glaring through the scope. One man after another tumbled down, my own shots blending with the general cacophony. I curled a little tighter, moaning as the pain radiated out to my ovaries, everything feeling like it was twisting in on itself. Stubbornly, I reached for another cartridge, but an empty leather loop let my questing fingers. Fuck! A shout from my left told me I'd been seen, and I lurched to my feet to meet the new threat, tripped and grunted as I slammed my left arm into a tree. Seeing me off balance, he charged me with a sword. I groaned, snatching out the first handgun, the one under my right arm, and shot him with less than 6 feet to spare. Fuck you, Steve, I spat, struggling to my feet. Another shout. Why did people always shout when they spotted an enemy? And a new guy slammed a fist into my head, barely rocking me. I laughed, jerked my elbow into his ribs, and then turned and kneed him in the balls. I said, fuck you too, asshole, and left him puking and holding his crotch. I had exactly 1 magazine in each handgun, so I scooped up the sword as I went past. It had a nice balance, with a medium-length blade that looked more like a katana. A female scream from above had me twisting around in time to see a girl with dark, curly hair and blonde streaks, Dereva, get pulled back from the edge by 2 others and into the shelter of the rocks. My breath stopped as I stared for long seconds, trying to see what happened to the girl, and when I couldn't, everything went red. All right, that is the end of chapter 45. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next week.